Welcome back to our last formal session of the day, though we will be following this up with a whiteboard session and breakout rooms as well. So let's get started on our session on glass collisions or glass window deterrent technology. And our first speaker is going to be Alex Sobolev from Guardian Glass. Take it away, Alex.
Hello, everyone. Glad to be here. Excited to talk. Let me just share my screen. Is it up for everyone?
All right, looks good now.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. So I'm with Guardian Glass, and I'll start off by giving a quick intro of Guardian. Guardian makes glass. So we melt sand and a bunch of other chemicals, and we produce glass. We also apply kind of advanced coatings on that glass to prevent energy from coming into the building, so you don't have as much AC load and other things like that, or keep energy in the building if that's the problem that you're trying to solve. So we sell glass for small buildings and medium-sized buildings, as well as really large buildings. We also sell a lot of glass into the residential single-family home space. And we have a full portfolio of bird-friendly products. So everything from FRIT to UV. And today, I wanted to mostly talk about how these materials work in general, not specific to our portfolio, but in the broader scheme of things. And specifically, how do we use these materials to prevent birds from colliding with glass? And what are the nuances in that space that maybe still deserve additional research so that we can make better products and more consistently performing products? This is a picture of the four predominant testing methodologies that exist across the world right now and that are in use. So ABC's tunnel, Martin Rosler's tunnel in Europe, Professor Clem's field test, and monitoring. These are used all over the place. And the interesting thing is they don't always agree with each other. They can test the same material and get different results. And that's interesting. You also have situations where you have buildings, in this case, two buildings, both using a very similar deterrent. One gets very few strikes. The other one gets actually a significant number of strikes. So why is that? Why are these materials, even though they're nominally the same, performing different? That's what I want to explore in this talk. And to start that conversation and that deep dive, I think it's important to anchor that birds are very visual creatures. When they're flying, they're navigating, they're using their eyes, they're trying to understand their spatial environment, and deterrents have to communicate using that language. So it has to signal to the animals that something is in their way. And if you're trying to signal that something's in the way, there's two components that are really important to that. One is the background, so the thing that you're trying to signal on top of. And I want to spend a few moments discussing that. And you can see here, there's a background behind this glass. It's very obvious that it's trees, but there's also a reflection there. And so this dynamic between foreground, background, and reflection, and what's seen through the glass is really important in this space. The basics of it are you can see images through glass and you can see images on glass, and that happens at the same time, but then that changes depending on the lighting conditions and what the environment looks like around that piece of glass. So here's reflection more clearly seen. So imagine that this image that we're looking at now is actually a piece of glass that we've zoomed in on, and this is the reflection on that piece of glass, or it might be the image that you see through that piece of glass. And I want to identify a few local areas that have very different visual properties. So first, up here, you have an area of uniform bright color. Then down here, you have an area of uniform dark color. And up in the trees, you might have this area where there's this mix of a lot of darks and a lot of brights. I would describe this as a visually noisy environment. All three of these happen at the same time on this particular piece of glass, but they appear in various amounts in any application. The interesting thing is, if you take one deterrent and you apply it across all of these, you'll see that it has a different visual presence across all of these. And that's what's so important about deterrents is that they don't always work the same way. They don't show up the same way across different installations or different environments or different directions that an animal might be approaching the glass from. Another really important idea is the idea of the content of that reflected or transmitted image. If the content includes something that the animals really want to go to, so in this case, let's say there's flowers and you have some hummingbirds, they might be most attracted to that food source in this scene, and everything else is secondary. And that can be an attractant that can overcome some of the performance of the deterrent as well. And finally, glass is variable, right? Glass is a material that looks like the environment that it's put in, and it looks different depending on where you're looking at it from. In this case, this is the same piece of glass at the same time of day, taken from maybe 3 or 4 feet apart. And you can see that on the left, it looks almost completely black, and on the right, it looks like the rest of the scene that's outside of this building. So two very different conditions. Again, so we talked about the background that the deterrents appear on. Now let's talk a little bit about the deterrents themselves. Hopefully the zoom bar is not in the way on your end. Um, so how can you manipulate a visual in front of that background image so that it stands out to the animals? There's a few different ways. So I'll use a metaphor to contextualize the different strategies that you have to work around with. Let's say that you're driving a car, you're going really fast, and there's a flood on this road. If it's daytime and everything's clear, you might notice that and you might stop by yourself. But for birds, if we're talking about glass, that might not be possible because they don't understand that glass is not an extension of the reality. They just take the images that they see literally. So if they see a reflection of a tree, they're going to assume that that's actually a tree. So it's more like driving on this foggy road and you don't know that there's a flood in front of you. So how, as a society, do we indicate to drivers that they should stop because there's dangers ahead? One way is to put out these large road cones that we've all seen on construction sites, and that should tell you to stop. In this case, there's 4 cones, right? 2 spread across each lanes, plenty to prevent a car from trying to get around. But what if you only put 1 out? Would a car stop? Would they slow down? Would they go around the cone? This is an important question. And this question exists in the bird-friendly space. This is one of the reasons why we have these spacing protocols that are related to the bird's body. But the main takeaway is that, if you put out 1 road cone, if you have 1 hawk sticker on the window, it's probably not going to work. Here, there's several different kinds of decals, and each post-it note represents an area where there was a window strike. So we have 4 decals and 20 strikes. So you really need to space out your deterrent evenly in order to get the animals to stop and recognize, hey, there's actually a full barrier in front of me, not just 1 item that I can go around. Now, how can we manipulate this differently? Let's say instead of having 4 large road cones, we change the size of the road cones. That's probably going to reduce how likely a driver is to stop. And that's a similar thing that happens with birds. In this case, on the left, we have a 2x2 grid with dots that are about 1/4 inch. And on the right, we have dots that are 1/8 of an inch. They are closer together. So now we're working with 2 variables, but generally speaking, the smaller you make a deterrent element, the harder it is to see. So you have to be aware of what the minimum deterrent size is. Finally, you can also change the let's say opacity. Now, this one is not real world for us, but in the world of glass, this is a real thing. So when you take a material and you put it further back in a window, it can be harder to see under certain lighting conditions. So here we have 2 pieces of glass stacked on top of each other in a similar way to the window makeup. And each number is drawn on the surface that it's found. So number 1 is on the outside of the building, number 4 will be on the inside of the building. And you can see that when lighting is even and it's the same intensity inside and out, all of these numbers are easily seen. But if you make it dark inside the building, which it usually is, and brighter outside, there comes a point where you can't see anything that's on the surfaces other than 1. Now, again, this is localized to what the scene is like, but it's something to keep in mind that if you're putting the turns further back, they're going to be harder to see. Additionally, you can change the color. So we use these bright oranges to indicate warnings, but if we made that a gray color, it certainly would be harder to see against this fog. And again, reduce the likelihood that someone will stop. Similar thing with deterrents. Each material has different colors, and depending on what the background is put on, it can be easier or harder to see. And here you can see that the more similar the deterrent is to the background, the more invisible it becomes. That's true with deterrence. So here we have white dots on the three different kind of lighting conditions that we described earlier. And if we put black dots, you can see that it reads very differently. It's easier to read on the bright background, but almost impossible to see in the dark. So these are the five kind of categories that you really have to keep in mind when you are designing deterrents or choosing them for your building. So pattern spacing, element size, the color and material visual contrast, the surface position, and additionally the glass makeup, because the glass makeup can change the appearance of that background. It could make it darker or brighter depending on the reflection or the tint of the glass. Again, back to communicating with these animals. So now we have the background that we discussed. We discussed the different ways we can create contrast, but how do materials actually do it? And the way that they do it is twofold. One, you can change how the material reflects light. So you can have something that is glossy, that is more mirror-like, and you can have something that's matte, that is more dull in color. You can also have things that change the way light passes through it. You can have something that's opaque, that is, let's say, blackout curtains. You can imagine they're going to stop light from going through, or you can have sheer curtains that are going to let the light pass through. So here we have something that's blocking light and a bubble that's letting light through. And these two things work in concert with each other. So you're always going to have materials that are going to be, let's say, glossy and blocking light, or maybe matte and see-through. And each one of these things is going to have it change differently depending on that visual context that it's put into. So if we're talking about having a fully bright scene or a mixed scene or just a fully dark, simple scene, all those things are going to change each one of these buckets slightly different. And each one of these buckets has a very different type of deterrent in it. So here are, let's say, the biggest, most popular kinds of deterrent and how they fit into this space. And I'm going to talk about each one of them a little bit more individually. So frit is a material, it's opaque, it blocks the light, that can be colored very easily. If this is put on the outside of the glass, it can be one of the most effective deterrents simply because it's so obvious under so many conditions. But it is sensitive to things like color change. And we talked about this earlier. If you make frit black, there are certain situations where it's going to be harder to see. It also has a special effect, and each material sometimes has different special effects. In the case of frit, it can cast a shadow behind it. So if you notice the white on a white becomes easier to see. Oftentimes in situation, white actually stands out even against white backgrounds and becomes a powerful tool for this particular deterrent. Depending on how it's set up, it can also be relatively inexpensive, but there's things to watch out for. Moving on, etch is fascinating because it lets light through, but it scatters it. So it's like a blurring effect. And it has a lot of different appearances. It's a little bit easier on occupants. It's harder to see from the inside. And on the outside, it also has a variety of presences. It has a superpower in the industry right now because a lot of different manufacturers make it. And it also breaks some of the trade-offs for production, which can lower its cost and also the complexity of the glass makeup. Then in Europe, you have these laminate dots that are really popular, basically a foil disc that's embedded between two pieces of glass. These are really interesting because they're curved and they can stand out again in a variety of lighting contexts, but they're never on surface one. But because they're so mirrored, they can still work well. And finally, you have products that reflect light, but also let it through. So these are glossy, but translucent. And these are interesting because it can really break a number of trade-offs for occupants inside a building, where from the inside, it's much harder to see, but on the outside, it's still shown to have a lot of deterrent effect. In this space, as a subcategory, is also UV deterrents. So here we're looking at a material that's reflecting visible spectrum light, so light that humans can see, but now we're looking at a product that's reflecting UV light. So this is light frequencies that humans can't see, but many birds can. And in the middle here, you can see a picture of this product taken with a UV camera. Now, this space is pretty diverse. All the manufacturers in the space make very different products from each other with the UV material positioned in different locations. It really has to be on surface one to work well because of the way that UV interacts with the rest of the glass. We also recommend that you put a laminate material behind it because it absorbs UV and you get more contrast in the UV space, which is already dimmer than the visible spectrum. And that's how all four of these works together. All very different, all interacting very differently with light, and each having their own special effects, which I didn't have time to get into. Now, In the research world, I think some of Martin Rosler's reports are excellent because they document very well the visuals of all of these products. But one of the kind of gaps in the research world right now is that we're not documenting it well enough. Even here with this report that's quite good, you still see multiple stimuli being presented to the animals. So there is the bright mode and the dark mode all appearing at the same time that things were tested. So we don't really know which one was the one that made the product work. And that's true of basically real buildings as well as other research methodologies where we need to go deeper to understand how the materials are working in those specific tests. Now, to
Okay,
step back from the
Alex,
research,
I just want to mention we're at time,
I
so maybe
know.
another
I have
minute.
like three more
Okay, thanks.
slides. I have three more slides if you don't mind. Um, so there's this general scale where you can have something that's more obvious, but it's going to have better performance, and you can have something that's less obvious is going to have less performance. This ties into how architects are actually solving for buildings. They're choosing products to, let's say, in certain parts to be more suitable for humans and for the people in the building to be more see-through. And in other places, they're choosing products that are either lower cost or higher efficacy. I think it's important for this community to know that when we're dealing with architects and building developers, there's at least these kind of three archetypes: people who just want to comply with the code, people who want to preserve the aesthetics of their building as much as possible, and those who really care about efficacy. And that's going to change which products are recommended and how you break all the trade-offs that I talked about today. All right, that's my slides. Thank you very much.